Hey, old man, what's your call sign? The laughter was already in Sergeant First Class Brandon Kell's voice before the question finished. The easy, rolling laughter of a man performing for an audience that has already decided to find him funny. He was leaning against the doorframe of the weight room at Fort Bragg's Special Operations Compound, arms folded across his chest, watching the janitor push his mop bucket down the corridor with the slow, patient rhythm of someone who had been doing this for a long time and intended to keep doing it. The janitor did not stop. His name was Walter Pruitt. He was 79 years old. He wore the gray uniform of the facility's contractor, a plain gray shirt with a small embroidered logo on the breast pocket, gray work pants, rubber-soled shoes worn down at the outside edge the way shoes wear when a man has walked on the same leg injury for decades. His hair was white and close-cropped, and his face was the face of someone who had accumulated weather. Not age exactly, but weather. The specific texture of a life that had been lived outdoors in difficult places. He was thin in the way of men who have always been lean, not men who have lost weight. And his hands on the mop handle were ropey with tendon and scar. The knuckles thickened. The left index finger crooked at an angle that suggested the last time it was broken, nobody had been available to set it. He pushed the bucket forward 3 more feet. "I'm serious," Kell said. He pushed off the doorframe and fell into step behind the janitor. 2 of his men, Specialist Torres and Sergeant Wade, drifting along with him. Because this was how it went with Kell, the way the moon pulled the tide. Every operator's got a call sign, even the guys who clean up after us. What do they call you, Mop Man? The squeegee? Torres laughed. Wade smiled. Walter Pruitt stopped. He turned around. His eyes were dark brown, nearly black, and they were the stillest thing in the corridor. Stiller than the painted cinderblock walls. Stiller than the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Stiller than the early morning Fort Bragg quiet that lived under everything here. They were eyes that had looked at a great many things and had decided, some time ago, that most things did not require a reaction. "Son," he said. His voice was quiet and even, a low, steady register, the kind that does not need to project, because it has long since stopped needing anyone to hear it. "I'm trying to finish this corridor before the 0600 brief." "That's not a call sign," Kell said. "No," Walter said. "It's not." He turned back to the mop. Kell looked at his men, grinned. He was 28 years old, 2 years into his Delta selection, and he ran at a sustained pitch of physical and psychological confidence that the selection process had tested and found intact. And this had confirmed for him something he had always suspected, that he was built differently from most. He was not a bad man. He was a young man who had become very good at hard things very fast, and the speed of that had not left much room for the slower kinds of learning. The corridor was in the basement level of the Special Operations Training Facility. Long, pale green, smelling of floor cleaner and gun oil, and the particular recycled air staleness of a building that never fully opened its windows. At one end, the weight room. At the other, the armory. Between them, the kind of anonymous institutional space that exists in every military building everywhere, noticed by no one except the people whose job is to maintain it. Walter Pruitt maintained it, had maintained it, in this building and the ones before it and the ones before those, for 11 years. He came in at 0430. He left at noon. He did not eat in the dining facility. He brought a sandwich in a paper bag and ate it in the supply closet he used as an office, sitting on an overturned bucket, and he did not talk much, and no one knew much about him, and that was exactly the way he preferred it. "See, here's the thing," Kell said, and his voice had shifted, not harder, but showier, the voice of someone settling into the part of the performance where the audience was most reliably his. Delta operators spend their whole career getting their identity stripped down to a call sign. Your name stops meaning anything. What you are is the call sign. And you want to tell me a man who mops floors in a Tier 1 facility just doesn't have one? He spread his hands. That's disrespectful to the craft. Walter kept mopping. Or maybe, Kell said, they gave you a call sign in whatever war you were in and it was something embarrassing. Korea, right? Had to be Korea, looking at you. What did they call you in Korea? Slow mop? Grandpa? He looked at Torres. What do you call a guy who was a cook in Korea? Leave the war alone, Torres said. He was smiling, but it was the smile of a man who means something slightly different from what his face is doing. Walter Pruitt stopped again. He turned around slowly, the way a very large piece of weather turns, not hurrying, not dramatic, simply pivoting with a weight that had nothing to do with speed. He looked at Kell. He looked at him for a long, flat moment with those dark, still eyes, and he reached into the breast pocket of the gray contractor's shirt, and he took out a small object and held it out flat on his palm. It was a coin, the size of a silver dollar, heavy, bronze gone nearly black with handling. On one side, an eagle, wings spread on the other, and here Kell leaned in, because the corridor light was inadequate, and the coin's face was worn smooth at the edges. A number, not a unit crest, not a motto, a number, and below it 2 words that Kell could not immediately read. He looked up. What is that? Something I carry, Walter said. That's all. And he put it back in his pocket. Kell stared at the pocket for a half-second. A half-second in which something moved across his face that was not quite doubt but was in the neighborhood of it, and then he recovered his angle and put his hand on Walter's shoulder. Come on, he said. Give me the call sign. His hand was not rough, but it was there, and it was the hand of a man who was used to the conversation going where he directed it. The smell of floor cleaner dissolved. The fluorescent hum disappeared. What replaced it was the smell of red clay and cordite and diesel exhaust, and the distant near-simultaneous percussion of small arms fire that lived in a specific frequency Walter Pruitt's nervous system had never entirely stopped listening for. And he was 31 years old in the dry heat of an unnamed firebase 3 kilometers inside a border that was not officially being crossed, in a country that was not officially being operated in a war that was not officially happening. The Army called it peacetime. The men on that firebase called it something else. Walter Pruitt had been a staff sergeant then, assigned to a reconnaissance element operating under cover of an advisory mission, the kind of mission that had no paperwork, no unit designation, no chain of command that a family member could be directed to if something went wrong. There were 7 of them. They were very good. They operated at night, in small numbers, at distances from support that current doctrine would have categorized as incompatible with survival. The coin in his pocket had been made by the element's commander, a master sergeant named Cal Duchamp, who was from New Orleans and who made things with his hands the way some men breathe, who had machined the coins himself from bronze stock on a lathe in the motor pool and pressed the numbers into them and the 2 words that were the element's name, and who had pressed one into each man's palm on their first mission and said, "You come back with this, I'll buy you a drink. You don't come back, I'll keep yours for you." Cal Duchamp kept 4 of them. Walter Pruitt and Staff Sergeant René Broussard were the 2 who came back. Broussard had gone home to Louisiana, and Walter had never heard from him again, which was the agreement, and the mission was buried in a classification level that did not have a public name. And the men who went in and came out, and the men who went in and didn't, were recorded nowhere that families could find them, and that was the deal they had made. And Walter had honored it, and was honoring it still. He came back to the corridor. Kell's hand was on his shoulder. Walter looked at the hand. He looked at the corridor, the pale green walls, the recycled air, the fluorescent hum. He looked at Kel's face, young, confident, lit with the particular brightness of a man who has not yet been in the place where the brightness is the first thing to go. He did not say anything. He turned back to the mop. Sergeant Major Diane Osai had been in the building since 0445. She was 43 years old, 21 years in the Army, and she ran the administrative function of the Special Operations Training Facility with the focused efficiency of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that the work was never finished, and the work was always worth doing. She had an office on the basement level, small, crowded, smelling of printer toner and the specific brand of green tea she drank all day. And her door was open at 0445 because it was always open, because the closed door was a thing she'd given up on in her second year and never missed. She saw Kel and his men follow the janitor down the corridor. She watched for 30 seconds. She watched Kel put his hand on the old man's shoulder. She closed her laptop. She did not go into the corridor. She picked up her phone instead, not the desk phone, her personal cell, and she called a number that was not in the base directory, a number that had been given to her 2 years ago by a command sergeant major who had said, "If you ever see something here that doesn't sit right and you don't know who else to call this." It rang once. "This is Hendricks." Sergeant Major Osai's voice was even and direct. She did not editorialize. "Sergeant Major, I have a situation in the basement corridor of the SO training facility. There's an elderly contractor, Janitor, goes by Walter Pruitt, being harassed by 3 operators. SFC Kel and 2 specialists. Kel has his hand on the man." She paused. "The old man is carrying a challenge coin. I got a partial look at it. Bronze, near black. Eagle on one side. What I think I saw on the other side was..." The silence on the line arrived before she finished the sentence. It was not a gap in the connection. It was the silence of a man who has stopped doing whatever he was doing and has become very still. "Describe the coin," Hendricks said. His voice had lost its professional ease entirely. "Eagle. Wings spread. Other side a number. I think I saw a 1. And 2 words below it." Another pause. "Longer. What does the old man look like?" "Late 70s. White hair. Thin left index fingers been broken and healed crooked." "Oh my God," Hendricks said. It was not an expletive. It was something much quieter than that. The sound a person makes when something they thought was lost permanently has just appeared somewhere they were not looking for it. "Don't let him leave," Hendricks said. "Don't let anyone touch that coin. I will be there in 8 minutes. Osei looked at her watch. The facility was 15 minutes from the command building by the standard route. The line disconnected. She walked to the corridor doorway and leaned against the frame and watched Kel still performing at the end of the hall, still talking, still in possession of the room as he understood it, and she waited. 6 minutes and 40 seconds later, she heard the vehicles. Not 1, at least 3, moving fast. And then the sound of the exterior doors opening, not the deliberate tactical opening of a building under operation, but the direct, purposeful opening of people who know where they are going and are not pausing to ask permission. Command Sergeant Major Raymond Hendricks came through the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor at a pace that was not quite running, but contained running's intent. He was 55, a square-built man with 32 years in special operations. The kind of career that the Army measured in deployments rather than years, because the years didn't quite capture it. Behind him came 2 colonels and a brigadier general, and none of them had been in the building 30 seconds ago, and all of them were here now, and the corridor, which had been Kel's stage, was no longer Kel's anything. Hendricks did not look at Kell. He looked at the old man in the gray contractor's uniform at the far end of the hall, with the worn-down shoes and the ropey hands and the dark, still eyes. And something in Hendricks's face did what faces do when they have been waiting a long time for something, and it is finally in front of them. He walked the length of the corridor. He stopped in front of Walter Pruitt. He came to attention. The salute was the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise thing Brandon Kell had ever witnessed, rendered by a command sergeant major with 32 years in Tier 1 Special Operations, directed at a man in a gray contractor's uniform holding a mop handle. Held without wavering at 3 full seconds while the fluorescent lights hummed and the corridor air recycled itself. And 60 collective years of Fort Bragg institutional memory tried to recalibrate around what was happening. Brigadier General Alicia Strand, standing 4 feet behind Hendricks, was already at attention. Both colonels were at attention. In the doorway of the weight room, Kell had come to attention without deciding to, the way the body sometimes acts before the mind catches up. Walter Pruitt looked at Hendricks for a moment. He set the mop handle against the wall. He straightened, not the straightening of ceremony, but the straightening of a man whose body remembers exactly how to do this and is choosing to do it now. He returned the salute, crisp and complete and unhurried, and when his arm came down, Hendricks took his hand in both of his. "Walter Chester Pruitt," Hendricks said. His voice was not the command register. It was something personal. "Raymond," Walter said, "how long have you been working in this building?" 11 years. 11 years. Hendricks shook his head once. Then he turned. Brigadier General Strand stepped forward. She was not reading from anything. She had memorized what she intended to say on the drive over, in the back of the command vehicle, in the way people memorize things that they understand the weight of. 11 years ago, she said, to the corridor, to the men who had assembled in it, and the doorways opening off it. Because by now there were 20 people in this hallway, and more arriving, this facility decommissioned its classified operational archive for the 1976 through 1983 Special Reconnaissance period. Much of that record has been reclassified above the standard operational level. What I can tell you is this." She turned to Walter. Master Sergeant Walter Chester Pruitt served in the United States Army from 1967 to 1988. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 tour in a theater of operations that does not have an unclassified name, and multiple deployments in support of missions that remain above the clearance level of everyone in this corridor except the man standing in front of me. She paused. What is documented in the unclassified record is this. Master Sergeant Pruitt holds the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. He holds the Silver Star. He was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device 4 times. He holds the Combat Infantryman Badge with 2 stars, indicating 3 wars. The corridor did not move. The element he served with in 1976 operated under the call sign Shadow. There were 7 men in that element. 5 did not come home. Master Sergeant Pruitt was one of 2 who did. She looked at him for a moment. His personal call sign within that element was Shadow 1. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that a corridor earns rather than achieves. Kell was standing at the edge of the weight room doorway. His face had the specific pallor of a man who has looked at something from one angle for a long time and has just seen it from another and cannot unsee it. He was thinking about the hand on the shoulder. He was thinking about the Korea comment. He was thinking about the coin. General Strand looked at him. "Sergeant First Class Kell." "Yes, ma'am." "You will write a full account of this morning's interaction to be submitted to your commanding officer by 1700. You will complete 30 days of remedial, historical, and cultural education with the command historian. You will appear before your commanding officer for formal counseling under AR 620. She paused. And you will stand here for a moment and understand that the man you put your hand on this morning was operating behind enemy lines in missions that don't have declassified names before your parents met. Kel said, "Yes, ma'am." It was barely audible. When the corridor had cleared, when the generals and colonels had moved to a more appropriate venue, and Kel's men had disappeared with the subdued speed of people trying not to be noticed, Walter Pruitt picked up the mop handle. Kel had not left. He was standing in the doorway of the weight room with his hands at his sides and his face showing something that had replaced the confidence entirely. Not shame exactly, but its first cousin. The thing that lives next door to shame and moves in when the swagger moves out. Walter looked at him. He left the mop against the wall and walked to the doorway and stopped in front of the younger man and put a hand on his arm. The same shoulder, approximately, that Kel had put on his shoulder an hour ago. Kel looked at the hand. He could not quite hold the old man's eyes. "You've got the makings," Walter said. His voice was the same low, quiet gravel as always. "I can see it. The selection didn't get it wrong." He paused. "But selection tests whether you can survive hard things. It doesn't test whether you know what hard things look like when they're standing in front of you in somebody else's clothing." He looked at Kel until Kel looked back. "The most dangerous men I ever knew didn't look dangerous. They looked like nothing. They had worked very hard to look like nothing. Because looking like nothing was the job, and they were good at their job." He took his hand off Kel's arm. "You're going to be good at yours. Just leave room for the possibility that you don't know what you're looking at yet." He went back to the mop. He finished the corridor. He was done by 0553. About 10 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, Walter Pruitt was in the commissary on the south end of Post, the small one, less crowded, the one the older families used, working through a short list with the focused efficiency of a man who doesn't spend time in stores that he doesn't need to spend. Canned goods, coffee, the specific brand of crackers that the larger commissary was always out of. Brandon Kell came around the corner of the aisle. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain shirt, carrying a small basket, and the difference from the man in the corridor 10 weeks ago was visible in the posture and the face rather than the clothes. The pitch had come down. The brightness that covered everything had been turned to something more specific, more directional. He looked like a man who had been somewhere uncomfortable and had stayed there long enough to let it do its work. He saw Walter and stopped. "Master Sergeant Pruitt." "Walter," Walter said. He looked at the basket. "You cooking tonight?" Kel looked at the basket too, as if he'd forgotten it was there. "My wife is. She sent me for." He looked up. "I've been in the archive. I heard. I read Shadow Element's unclassified summary." He paused. 3 pages. I know there's more that I can't see. But 3 pages was... He stopped. Started differently. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, properly, not in a write-up. I wanted to say it to you." Walter looked at him for a moment, those dark, still eyes, the depth underneath. "I know," Walter said. He took a can from the shelf and looked at the label and put it in his own basket. "How's the selection prep going?" Something shifted in Kel's face. The surprise of a man who expected the conversation to stay in one place and found it had moved to somewhere more useful. "Good," he said. "Better, good," Walter said. He moved down the aisle. "Tell your wife to go easy on the garlic." Kel watched him go. The worn-down shoes, the gray contractor's shirt, the white hair, The crooked finger on the basket handle, the unhurried pace of a man who has been moving at his own speed his entire life and has never had any particular reason to change it. There are men among us who chose to become invisible, and who were so good at it that even when the mission was over, they could not entirely stop. They move through the ordinary world doing ordinary things, and they carry what they carry without display and without complaint. And the weight of it would break most of us. And they don't mention that either. If you are ever in the presence of one of them, and you are paying attention, you will feel it before you see it. Something in the stillness, something in the depth behind the eyes, something in the way the room does not change them, and they do not need it to. That is what earned looks like. That is what Shadow One looks like. In a gray uniform, with a mop. If you were moved by Walter Pruitt's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.